Welcome to the module on Event Management 101. By the end of this module, we hope you are able to conduct a comprehensive assessment of physical, reputational, emotional, financial, and facilities risks, provide a realistic assessment of those risks by utilizing the risk management matrix, conduct a comprehensive exploration and examination of options for mitigating actions, select the most appropriate mitigating actions for each risk, develop contingency and crisis response plans, consult with campus experts in planning, communicate risk management plans to other constituents of the event, implement events according to pre-established risk management plans, document and evaluate outcomes of risk management plans, and internalize and articulate the value of risk management.
The why. To promote a safe and positive experience. Risk management is a process of identifying, assessing, and planning for possible risks associated with activities and events. The purpose is to generate ideas and practices to limit uncertainties, potential dangers, and loss of your organization or group. When it comes to risk management, it is always better to be proactive than reactive. We must identify the risks. Who is exposed to potential harm? What is exposed to potential loss? What are the potential consequences? What is the extent of potential harm or damage?
Guiding philosophy and approach. To better understand how we can effectively function to create safe and positive experiences, NMSU has been adopting a guiding philosophy known as the facilitator model. When thinking about risk management, one must think about the overarching philosophy as it relates to the role of the university and the role of you as the student. Some of the policies developed at the institution are not just the university making rules. Instead, most policies are in response to laws. This facilitator university model also emphasizes student empowerment and development by encouraging you and your peers to make choices within boundaries. Under this model, NMSU as the facilitator does not make decisions for your student organization. Instead, you and your members are responsible for making decisions. Our role is to teach you how to make good choices and process the potential outcomes of your decision making. The facilitator university seeks to move away from litigation avoidance-based thinking toward an emphasis on proactive, educational, and shared approach to risk management. Often we get the question, we want to do X. Will I be liable if something goes wrong? If the response is, I don't know, what would you do if the answer was yes? We will provide recommendations, but the decision making is ultimately up to you and other organizational leaders. The goal is to fall in the middle. Train, educate, instruct, discuss options, and remove options when unreasonable. The facilitator is a guide who provides as much support, information, interaction, and control as is reasonable and appropriate to the situation. The university is responsible for facilitating a reasonably safe educational environment where we train, maintain, supervise, and warn. You and your members are responsible for accepting their role as members of the broader community. We are all risk managers. Collaboration is another hallmark of a facilitator university. If we do not facilitate, someone else will. Risks are complex and thus our best efforts can be canceled out by other variables if not coordinated. This model is all about partnership. In terms of values, we want to help you understand why a rule is in place. It is not about power and control, but rather education and empowerment. Rules are not implemented arbitrarily, but put in place with a background. The approach we take is education-centered. Every interaction is an opportunity to educate, teach, and influence. When dealing with risk management, we take a proactive stance. We openly discuss and manage the risks rather than avoiding the opportunities to educate and develop. Is this an appropriate and reasonable level of risk? What is within your control to prevent harm to others and accomplish goals? It is a get-to-yes philosophy. The last hallmark is reflection, where we are in a constant state of reflection and evaluation. There is intentionality in our decision-making and conversations where we are all seeking to do the right thing.
What is risk management? We have spoken a lot about the guiding philosophy of risk management here at NMSU and the approach we take, but how do we define risk management? We mentioned in the beginning, risk management is the process of identifying, assessing, and planning for possible risks associated with activities and events. More formally, risk management is a process of advising organizations of the potential and perceived risks involved in their activities. It also includes monitoring organization activities and taking corrective actions and proactive steps to minimize accidental injury and/or loss. This is the common language the university uses. You can never get rid of risk. You can only manage it. Risks can be both positive and negative. Risks can include opportunities, new ventures, and stretching ourselves in new ways. Risks can also include injury, damage, and liability for legal wrongs. The key concepts to highlight within that definition. Process. Risk management is a process. It is not a one-time, one-and-done deal. Risk management occurs in the planning, implementation, and assessment of organizational events or activities. It is a 365 rule. Advising. In line with the facilitator university model, we do not mandate what type of events or activities organizations have, but instead advise you on the risks associated with them. Proactive. We seek to be proactive rather than reactive. We seek to mitigate or transfer risk through a proactive approach. One thing we want to clarify is that there is often a misperception where risk management is perceived as the fun killer. The reality is that what risk management is really about is sound decision making. Risk management is everyone's job. The goal of proactive risk management is to prevent a significant event and to encourage the fulfillment of the organization's mission, purpose, and goals. This strategy can be more difficult because you do not hear about the significant events that never happened. We must be committed to openly discussing and managing risks. Ask the right questions. What is the root cause of the risk? The choices you make as individuals do not just impact you, but they impact your community. The choices you make as an organization do not just impact the individual organization, but can have a broader impact on the community. The risk management process. Is this an organization activity? The first step in the risk management process is first determining whether or not what y'all are hosting is an organization activity. Organizations oftentimes struggle with this and whether their travel is still an organization event for events such as road trips. Many times what your organization is hosting will be considered an organization activity in the eyes of the university. If it is, we want to work with you to ensure you are managing the risks of the event. Here are questions to consider. What is the purpose of this activity? Who is attending this activity? Why are they attending? Could it be associated in any way with your group? How? How is the event being publicized or communicated? What resources are being used to fund the event? Would a reasonable person think that this activity is associated with your organization? Has your advisor assisted with the coordination of the event, or are they participating in the event as your advisor? As a leader in your organization, do you feel that you are in any way connected to the particular activity? If not, who would be held responsible in the event of an accident or a mishap? Looking at the questions, the response to just one or two of these questions may not be a conclusive answer to the question. Each activity is likely to have a unique set of circumstances. As leaders, you should evaluate each activity separately. The intent of asking these questions is certainly not so that you and your members find loopholes or ways not to categorize this as an organizational event. This strategy will likely never work. The university will always take into account the totality of the circumstances. We've talked about our guiding philosophy, we've defined risk management, and we've discussed the proactive approach to have a successful event. Now, how do you integrate proactive risk management into your organization? The diagram shows the process you should use to integrate this risk management process into your organization. First is to identify critical issues and key players defining roles. Next is to assess existing policies, procedures, and practices. Once you do that, then you can create a plan. Here's where your event form comes into play. After you create your plan, you will educate others of the plan, implement the plan, and monitor the plan during an event or activity. Lastly, you will evaluate what worked well and what did not. We will go into each of these areas in more depth shortly. Keep in mind that risk management is a living, breathing thing. It is not a one-time and done situation. We often plan for an event, implement all of our plans, the event succeeds, and then we move on to the next event. We need to start thinking of this in a much larger context than that. Risk management is a process. A process means it is alive, it is ongoing. It is not a stagnant, documented thing. It is a continual cycle where we identify, we mitigate, and we monitor. Risk management cannot stop at the identification of risk. It has to go further. It has to go into the mitigation plan. It has to go into the steps where we think about how we monitor our organization activities, events, or operations to make sure that we are managing the risk in the ongoing activity. How do we make sure that what we say we are going to do to mitigate risks is taking place? How do we monitor the event to deal with the risk in the moment? It's about taking corrective action. Identify. The first step in the risk management process is to identify what you are trying to accomplish at an event or activity. What are the organization's own protocols and guidelines for their own events? How does this event fit with the organization's guiding documents or organizational process? Considering this is critical because it reinforces your responsibility and the opportunity for responsibility in managing risks and planning your own events. Does this event or activity further your mission/purpose/goals? If not, how can it be adapted to meet these goals? Next, think about your guiding boundaries. Identify institutional policies that may govern the event or activity. After this, think about your organization's ability or resources to pull this off. Do you have the space, money, time, and people necessary for this event or activity? Do you foresee anything preventing you from accomplishing your goals? The last step in this stage is to identify the risks. At NMSU, we have a holistic approach and think about risks in 5 areas: physical, reputational, emotional, financial, and facilities, which is abbreviated with the acronym PREFF. Here are some things to think about. How will this activity benefit you as an organization? How does this activity fit with your mission, the mission of the university? How will this event impact the broader university community? Are there ways you can still engage in this activity and reduce the risk associated with the event? Can you consult with others and resources for assistance? Whatever your role is, assess what can go wrong at the individual level, the departmental level, and the institutional level. Then decide if those risks can be mitigated or are worth the chance. PREFF is a holistic approach to appropriately identifying and mitigating any foreseeable risks. In other words, it is a way to easily risk manage any event. Let's start with step 1, and that is to identify any potential risks associated with PREFF. The letters stand for the categories of risks you need to be aware of when planning your event. Let's define them now. Physical risks. These involve harm or injuries to the physical body. Examples of potential physical risks might include drowsy driving, a car accident, or dangerous travel conditions such as inclement weather, an obvious risk such as rope climbing, or a less obvious risk such as a foodborne illness from a picnic. Reputational risks. These apply to the reputation of the individual officers and the members present, the reputation of the student organization, and the reputation of the university as a whole. Examples of potential reputation risks include poor conduct or behavior or negative representation of the group while at an event. Emotional risks. These pertain to the thoughts and feelings of the organization's members, participants, or attendees, and any other constituents of the event or activity. Examples of potential emotional risks might include lack of accessibility to a vehicle, or exclusion of members who can attend, or selecting a theme for your event that stereotypes or offends a particular group. Financial risks. These involve both the budget for the specific event and the overall financial health of the student organization. Examples of potential financial risks might include costs for vehicle rentals, lodging, not budgeting the proper amount for an event, or paying for damages incurred by attendees. Facilities risks. These include both the safety of the facilities used for your members or participants and the maintenance of the facilities used by your members or participants. Examples of facilities risks might include lack of proper maintenance of a vehicle, misuse or mistreatment of a facility, exceeding room capacity, or crowd control. All 5 of these areas of PREFF need to be considered whenever assessing and identifying potential risks that could be encountered, and strategies should be created for how your organization plans to mitigate any perceived risks.
Assess. Once we understand what the risks are, we must assess their probability and impact. This is the next step in the risk management process. This event planning matrix is a visual guide adapted for military, business, and medical fields. It helps you prioritize so you can develop plans for mitigating the high-level risks. You should complete this in your initial and then final planning of an event or activity. Think about an activity. If your organization were to go cliff diving, that may result in death, and there is a high probability that something will go wrong. If you are watching a movie in the Corbett Center auditorium, there is a minimal threat to safety, and there is an unlikely probability something will go wrong. Proactive risk management includes the following. List all event activities. Identify the reasonable risk associated with each activity. Brainstorm methods to reduce or eliminate risks to an acceptable level. Create an action plan for implementing risk reduction strategies by checking it against external sources and get approval from appropriate constituents and advisors before you move forward. Measure what you are doing against what you say you value, the policies and procedures that you follow, and your operating manual. Evaluate the event and risk strategies for effectiveness. Identify performance gaps and strategies to close the gap. When you assess each activity in an event, think about it in the context of the severity of consequences and the probability that something will go wrong.
Mitigate, implement, and monitor. Now that you have seen the significance of identifying and assessing risks, let's look at ways to plan and mitigate risks. There are 4 ways to mitigate risks: accept, modify, transfer, and eliminate/avoid. If you accept risk, you will assume the consequences of risk. Traditionally, this will be a low risk you are willing to accept in order to include activity. What are our plans for responding? If you modify risks, you make changes to modify your event or activity. Think about who can help us, i.e., experts. Here are some other ways to modify risks: security, supervision and training for staff and volunteers, procedures, signage with instructions, admittance and access controls, restricted areas, and warning systems. Transferring risks occurs through the following: insurance as an option, clear instructions, contracts, waiver forms as an educational tool, written contracts with staff and volunteers, third-party vendors. The last way to mitigate risks is to eliminate/avoid risks. You are finding another way to accomplish your goal for the event. In this instance, the risk outweigh the benefits. How else can we accomplish our goals? You work to change plans. However, it is not enough to develop mitigation strategies. We have to implement these plans and monitor their effects. When planning your event or activity, decide what to do and communicate your plans. Gather ideas from your current and former student leaders and other institutions if they have similar programs. Consult with risk managers on campus. The next stage is implementing and monitoring the event. Some factors to consider when implementing effective risk management. What policies will need to be considered? What role will I be playing in the oversight of the event? Whose event is it? What is the purpose of the event? And what are the details of the event?
Crisis response plans. One gap in implementing events is often in crisis response. One way to manage this gap is through a crisis response plan. Intentional development of a crisis response plan prior to an event or activity, and educating organization members about that plan and chain of command are crucial steps for effectively managing emergency situations. Educating members prior to a crisis is crucial. All organization members must know who is in charge and be prepared to follow the plan. Keeping your advisor in the loop is a great idea. Again, the more detail you provide, the less questions your reviewer will have about this portion of the event form. The following information is intended to assist students in the development of a crisis response plan, but should be considered a guide for designing a protocol that fits the organization's needs. In creating a crisis response plan, think about the roles people will play in it: officers, the facility, the security and police, your advisor, the media, etc. When creating a crisis response plan, the following should be included: detailed plans of action for various situations, attention to medical needs, contact information for important parties, crisis fact sheets or incident report forms, designated organizational officers and crisis team who can take charge of a crisis situation. Once created, all officers and volunteers should have copies for this reference just in case of emergency.
Evaluate. Evaluation is the final step in the risk management process. This is an essential step, but often ignored because there is always more to do. One of the things we often miss with risk management, and it's unfortunate because it can cause more work in the long run, is the post-evaluation. After an event or activity, take the time to go back and reflect on what went well and what did not go well. See how the risk management is working. Keep it simple. Think about the following: what went well? What did not go well? What changes should we make? How will we document all of this? This evaluation stage is important for your organization to make more informed, educated decisions in the future. Liability. As we alluded to earlier, risk management is oftentimes thought about in terms of liability. While we use a proactive risk management approach, we still want to touch on liability and what that means for your organization. Liability is associated with similar verbiage: negligence, legal duty, reasonable care, foreseeable harm, etc. Let's look at liability on a line where on one side is no liability, where the liability does not exist, and on the other side, all policies are violated at full liability. No matter the event or activity, you will never be able to ensure liability ceases to exist. However, using a proactive risk management approach ensures you are doing all you can to mitigate the risks and consequently the liability. In planning your events and activities, we are asking you to do only what a reasonable person would do. You are not expected to be a superhero eliminating every risk or all liability. The reasonable person is rational and is merely asked to do what is within a normal scope of expectations. Reasonable people will weigh the real dangers and prioritize resources accordingly. Reasonable persons only attend to reasonably foreseeable risks. It is important to understand what things a court of law will look for in order to establish liability on the part of an individual or an organization. Generally, students and their organizations can be held liable by a court of law for two kinds of liability: contract and tort. A contract is a binding agreement between two parties in which each gives something in return for something else. A tort is a civil wrong in which someone either intentionally or negligently causes harm to another person, and the most common kind of tort is negligence, breach of duty owed to another person. Organizations will be liable if there is evidence of negligence. Negligence is the failure to use reasonable care. Reasonable care is the degree of care a reasonably careful person would use under similar circumstances. The key is to exercise reasonable care to prevent any harm that might be foreseeable as a result of your activities or events. The more you do to keep your members and participants physically and mentally safe, the less likely you are to be found in breach of your duty. Remember, reasonable care is a process and not a point. A way to implement reasonable care is by fostering a culture of care.
Takeaways. Here are some takeaways to keep in mind. Risk management is a process of identifying, assessing, and planning for possible risks associated with activities and events. The purpose is to generate ideas and practices to limit uncertainties, potential dangers, and loss for your organization or group. When it comes to risk management, it is always better to be proactive than reactive. You can be held personally liable, and we're all in this together. We never want to see our students put in a bad position legally. You can't control all risk, and some things are unforeseeable, but making strides to manage risk can help protect you and your organization and NMSU. How you plan to mitigate risks, PREFF, is key.